You don't know what you're getting into, Marcus hissed, shoving her backward in front of the entire courtyard. What he didn't know. Sienna Walcott had 10 years of black belt training, and a father's unfinished promise riding on every breath she took. In less than 4 seconds, the golden boy of Millhaven hit the ground. Hard, the crowd gasped. Phones came up, and somewhere across town, an old karate instructor's hands began to shake because he recognized that stance. He'd seen it before, 18 years ago, on a boy this town destroyed for telling the truth. Now his daughter was standing in the exact same spot. This isn't just a story about a bully who picked the wrong girl. It's about a secret 3 generations tried to bury, a debt about to come due. What happens next will break your heart, then heal it completely. There are towns you arrive in, and there are towns that arrive in you. Millhaven was the second kind. Sienna Walcott didn't know that yet. She just knew the bus had been running for 6 hours, and her legs had gone numb an hour ago. She watched the cornfields roll by, gold and endless. Flat against a gray morning behind her, 2 seats back, a baby was crying. Somewhere in front, a man snored with his mouth open. Sienna kept her eyes on the window. In her lap sat a canvas bag, faded green, strap worn thin from years of being slung over one shoulder. She held it the way some people hold a Bible or a photograph, like it was the only thing left that made sense. Inside that bag was a black belt, folded, careful, untouched in 6 months. She hadn't put it on since the funeral. The bus driver called out the stop, Millhaven College. Next stop 5 minutes. Sienna straightened, pulled the bag closer. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandfather. I'll be at the station. Drive carefully means nothing on a bus, so I'll just say, I'm glad you're coming, kid. She smiled at that. A small, tired smile. The first one in days. Her grandfather, Earl Walcott, had a way of saying things sideways, like a man who learned a long time ago that straight talk could hurt more than it helped. Sienna hadn't seen him in 3 years. Not since her father stopped visiting. Not since things between her father and this town went quiet in a way that never got explained. She didn't ask questions back then. She was learning slowly that some silences cost more than the truth ever would. The bus pulled into the station. Brakes hissed. The doors opened with a metallic groan, and there he was. Earl Walcott stood by an old blue pickup truck, hands in his jacket pockets, a baseball cap pulled low over silver hair. He looked older than she remembered, thinner. But his eyes, sharp, blue steady, those hadn't changed. There she is, he said. Last time I saw you, you were yay high. He held his hand at his hip. Sienna laughed despite herself. I was 16, Grandpa. Not 6, felt like yesterday either way. He took her duffel bag, slung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Then his eyes caught the canvas bag still in her hand. The one she hadn't let go of. He didn't ask about it. He just nodded like he understood exactly what it was, and exactly why she carried it that way. Come on, he said, truck's running. Heater's broken, so is the radio. But the seats are warm enough. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, past the gas station, past the diner with the flickering sign, past a church with a hand-painted banner that read, Welcome back, students. Millhaven was small. The kind of small where everyone waved at every truck, because chances were they knew who was driving it. You start classes Monday, Earl said finally. Sienna looked out the window. You liar. Sienna looked out the window. No liar. She huffed a small laugh. Maybe a little. Good, Earl said. Means you still care about something. They passed the edge of campus. Old brick buildings. Ivy crawling up the walls like it had been there longer than the school itself. Students walked in clusters, laughing, carrying boxes, hugging parents goodbye. Sienna watched them with something like distance. Like she was looking through glass. She wasn't here to make friends. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here because her mother needed space to grieve quietly. Because Sienna needed somewhere new to breathe. Because her grandfather had offered, without hesitation, the moment he heard the news. Your dad, Earl said suddenly, eyes on the road, used to drive this same stretch. Back when he was about your age. Sienna turned to him. He went to school here? No. Earl's jaw tightened slightly. He trained here. Different reason. Different time. Trained where? Earl didn't answer right away. The truck rattled over a pothole. There's a dojo on the edge of town, he said finally. Pruitt's place. Small, quiet. Your father spent a lot of hours there, long before you were born. Something in Sienna's chest tightened. Father never talked about Millhaven. Not once, not in 18 years. Why didn't he ever mention it? Earl was quiet for a long moment. Some things, he said, a man buries so deep, even his own kid never finds them. Doesn't mean they're not there. Sienna wanted to ask more. But something in her grandfather's face told her this wasn't the day for it, so she let it go for now. They pulled into a narrow gravel driveway. A small house, white paint peeling at the edges, a porch with 2 rocking chairs and a wind chime that hadn't been oiled in years. It creaked softly in the breeze. "Home base," Earl said, killing the engine. "Smaller than what you're used to, I bet." "It's perfect," Sienna said. And she meant it. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old coffee. Photographs lined the hallway, some in color, most in faded sepia. Sienna paused at one, a young man in a white gi, mid-stance, fists raised, a wide grin on his face. She knew that smile. "Dad," she whispered. Earl came up behind her, set down her bag. 18 years old in that picture. "Same age you are now," Sienna stared at the photo. Her father, younger than she'd ever seen him, lighter somehow, like the weight he carried later in life hadn't found him yet. "He looks happy," she said quietly. "He was," Earl said. For a while, Sienna turned to him. "What happened?" Earl's eyes lingered on the photograph a moment longer than necessary. "Some stories," he said, "need the right time to be told. This isn't it. Not yet." Patted her shoulder. Gentle. Final. "Get some rest, kid. Big day tomorrow." That night, Sienna lay awake in the small guest room, ceiling fan ticking overhead. She thought about her father's smile in that photograph. She thought about the silence that came after. She thought about the black belt folded in the canvas bag, sitting now in the corner of the room, untouched. And she thought, for the first time in months, that maybe coming here wasn't just about getting away. Maybe it was about getting closer, something her father had left behind, something Millhaven hadn't let go of either. Morning came with the smell of bacon and the sound of a screen door slapping shut. Sienna found Earl in the kitchen, flipping eggs with the focus of a man performing surgery. "Eat something," he said without turning around. "First impressions go better on a full stomach." She sat at the small table, took the plate he handed her. "You sound like you've given this speech before." "Once or twice." He sat across from her, sipping black coffee. "Your dad hated eggs, by the way. Used to hide them under his napkin and think I didn't notice." Sienna smiled around a bite. "Did you?" "Every single time." It was a small moment. Ordinary. But it filled something in her chest that had been hollow for months. A reminder that her father had once been young. Once been someone's troublesome teenager. Once been loved in this very kitchen at this very table. After breakfast, Earl drove her to campus for student orientation. Millhaven State College wasn't large. A handful of brick buildings arranged around a central quad. A clock tower at its center. Students moving in loose streams between classes that hadn't even started yet. "You'll find your way," Earl said, pulling up at the curb. "And if you don't, ask someone. People here are decent, mostly." Earl's eyes flicked toward a group of students near the fountain. Loud, expensive clothes. The kind of laughter that came from looking down at someone, not with them. "Every town's got a few exceptions," he said simply. "Don't let them get under your skin." Sienna nodded, climbed out, shouldered her backpack. The campus buzzed with first-day energy. New faces, new nerves. Sienna moved through it quietly, registration forms in hand, eyes scanning room numbers. She found her dorm assignment list posted outside the student union. Her gaze drifted down the page until she found her own name, Walcott, Sienna. Brightwood Hall. Room 14 beside the list. A folding table had been set up with a hand-painted banner. Student org fair, find your peoples, lined the quad. Debate club, chess society, outdoor adventure group, open music collective, strumming an off-key guitar. Sienna walked past most of them without slowing, until she reached a table near the end. Quiet. Single flyer taped to the front read, "Millhaven Karate Club. All levels welcome." Behind the table sat a young man, maybe her age, hunched slightly, eyes down. He had a kind face, soft features, the posture of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. "Hey," Sienna said. He looked up, startled, like he wasn't used to people stopping. "Oh, hi, sorry. You interested in karate?" "Maybe," Sienna said. "Tell me about it." He brightened slightly. "Small club. We treat Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mr. Pratt runs it. He's got a dojo just off campus. He's old school. But good, Pratt," Sienna repeated, the name catching in her memory like a hook. "Yeah? You know him?" "No," she said slowly. "Not yet." The young man extended a hand. "I'm Caleb." "Caleb Foster, Sienna." She shook his hand. "Walcott." Something flickered behind Caleb's eyes at the name. A pause. "Brief, then gone, Walcott," he repeated. That's a name I think I've heard before. Around the dojo, maybe." Old photos on the wall. Sienna's pulse quickened slightly. A long time ago, Caleb's brow furrowed, like he was trying to place a memory just out of reach. Small world. Before either of them could say more, a shadow fell across the table. "Caleb, still trying to recruit nerds into your little karate cult?" Sienna turned. A young man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive Millhaven State athletic jacket. Behind him stood two others, laughing before the joke had even landed, the way people laugh when they're more afraid of being left out than they are amused. Caleb's shoulders dropped instantly. His eyes fell to the table. "Hey, Marcus Holt." Sienna didn't know the name yet. She recognized the type immediately. She'd met enough of them over the years. Boys who mistook cruelty for charisma, who built themselves up by tearing others down in public, where the audience mattered more than the target. Recruiting season again, huh? Marcus picked up one of Caleb's flyers, glanced at it, smirked, then let it fall to the ground like it was trash. Didn't realize Millhaven still had a Karate Kid club. His friends laughed. Caleb bent down, quietly picked the flyer back up. Said nothing. Sienna felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger exactly, something colder. More controlled, she picked up another flyer from the table, smoothed it flat, set it carefully back in its place. Marcus's eyes shifted to her, like he was noticing her for the first time. "New face, you lost?" "No," Sienna said evenly. "Just talking to my friend." Caleb blinked at the word friend, like he hadn't heard it directed at him in a long time. Marcus's smile thinned. "Cute. New girl already collecting strays. Better than collecting an audience," Sienna said. "Looks exhausting. Always needing people to laugh at your jokes." The two friends behind Marcus stopped laughing immediately, glancing at each other. Marcus's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that someone hadn't flinched. "Careful," he said, voice lower now. "This isn't your town yet. You don't know how things work here." "I'm a fast learner," Sienna said simply. For a long second, nobody moved. Then Marcus forced a laugh, shook his head, and turned away, his friends trailing after him like satellites. Caleb let out a breath he seemed to have been holding the entire time. "You didn't have to do that, I know," Sienna said. "He's not someone you want to make an enemy of," Caleb added, voice quiet. "His family basically funds half the buildings on this campus. Nobody touches him." Sienna glanced toward Marcus's retreating back. "Sounds like a guy who's never been told no." Caleb gave a small, tired smile. "You have no idea. There was a story there." Sienna could hear it in the way Caleb's voice dropped, the way his hand absent-mindedly touched his ribs like an old bruise remembered more than felt. She didn't ask. Not yet. Some stories needed the right time. She was learning that lesson twice in one day. So she said instead, nodding toward the flyer, "Tuesdays and Thursdays?" Caleb looked up, surprised. "You're actually interested?" "More than you know," Sienna said. She didn't explain why. Didn't mention the black belt waiting in a canvas bag back at her grandfather's house. Didn't mention the photograph of her father, 18 years old, throwing a punch with a grin on his face. She just smiled, took the flyer, folded it carefully into her pocket. Like it mattered more than it should. The dojo sat where the town gave up trying to be a town, past the last gas station, past the railroad crossing that hadn't seen a train in years. A low building with a faded sign, "Pruitt's Martial Arts." The paint chipped at the edges, the parking lot more gravel than asphalt. Sienna stood outside it. Tuesday evening, canvas bag in hand, heart beating harder than she expected. She hadn't told Caleb she was coming. Hadn't told her grandfather either. This felt like something she needed to do alone. She pushed open the door. A bell chimed softly above her head. Inside, the space was simple. Wooden floors, scuffed and worn smooth by decades of bare feet. Mirrors lined one wall. The other held photographs, dozens of them, students through the years, trophies in glass cases gathering dust, ribbons faded by night, and there, sweeping the floor near the back, was an old man. Gordon Pruitt moved slower than his photographs suggested he once had. Silver hair cropped short, shoulders still broad despite his age. Faded G patched at one elbow hung on him like a second skin. He looked up when the bell chimed. "We're not open for new students till Thursday," he said, not unkindly. "Just matter of fact the way old men often are." "I'm not exactly new," Sienna said. Gordon set the broom against the wall, studied her for a long moment. "You trained somewhere before?" "Yes, sir. How long?" 10 years. Gordon's eyebrows lifted slightly. 10 years is a long time for someone your age to keep at anything. "My father taught me," Sienna said. "Since I was 8, something shifted in Gordon's expression, subtle, like a door creaking open somewhere deep inside him. "Your father," he repeated slowly. "What's his name?" Sienna hesitated. "Just for a breath, Daniel," she said. "Daniel Walcott." The broom slipped from where Gordon had leaned it, clattering against the floor. He didn't move to pick it up. He just stared at her. Really stared. Like he was looking past her face into some memory buried 30 years deep. "Daniel's daughter," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You knew him." Gordon didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward her, studying her features the way a man studies a photograph he hasn't seen in years, searching for resemblance. "Your eyes," he said finally. "Same as his. Exactly the same." Sienna felt her throat tighten. "He never talked about this place, about you. About anything that happened here." Gordon's jaw worked silently for a moment. "That doesn't surprise me," he said. "Why not?" Gordon walked to the photograph wall, ran a weathered finger along the edge of one frame. He lifted it carefully from its hook, turned it toward her. A young man, maybe 18, stood in a karate stance mid-motion, a wide grin frozen on his face. The exact photograph Sienna had seen in her grandfather's hallway. "He trained here every day after school," Gordon said quietly. "Best student I ever had. Faster hands than anyone twice his age. Smarter too. Knew when to fight and when to walk away. It's rarer than people think." Sienna stared at the photograph, throat tight. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Why did he leave? Why didn't he ever come back?" Gordon was quiet for a long, long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Heavier. Older somehow, even than his years suggested. "There are things I should have told someone a long time ago," he said. "Things I didn't. And your father paid a price for my silence that he shouldn't have had to pay." Sienna's heart pounded. "What price?" Gordon set the photograph down gently on a nearby bench. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Not today," he said. "Not like this. You just walked through that door. You deserve the truth, Sienna. But you deserve it whole, not in pieces." Standing in a doorway, it was the first time he'd said her name. She looked at him, startled. Gordon offered the smallest, saddest smile. "Your father wrote me years ago, told me about you, told me your name. Told me you trained like him, quiet, careful, dangerous only when it mattered." Tears pricked at the corners of Sienna's eyes before she could stop them. "He talked about me? More than you'd think," Gordon said. "He was proud, Sienna. Prouder than he probably ever told you outright. Some men carry love the same way they carry guilt, quiet, folded up small." Afraid to take up space, Sienna wiped at her eyes, embarrassed, but Gordon didn't look away, didn't make her feel small for it. "Put your belt on," he said instead, nodding toward the canvas bag still clutched in her hand. "Let's see what 10 years built," Sienna blinked. "Now? No better time than now," Gordon said. "Talk comes easier after the body remembers what it knows. Trust me on that." She changed in the small back room, slipping into a spare gi Gordon kept on hand for guests. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tied the black belt around her waist. The same motion she'd done 1,000 times before. The same motion her father had taught her. Hands guiding hers, voice patient, tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. She stepped back onto the floor. Gordon stood waiting, arms loose at his sides, the posture of a man who'd spent 50 years reading bodies before they moved. "Show me your stance," he said. Sienna settled into position, feet shoulder width, hands raised. Gordon's breath caught audibly. "That's his stance," he murmured. "Exactly his." For the next 30 minutes they moved together, slow at first, testing. Gordon calling out forms, watching her execute them with the precision of someone who had trained not out of obligations, but out of love for the craft itself. He corrected her twice. Small things, the angle of her elbow, the depth of her stance. Both times, his voice softened with something close to reverence. "Your father used to make that exact same mistake," he said the second time, a faint laugh escaping him. "Drove me crazy for a year before he fixed it." By the end of the session, sweat beaded on Sienna's forehead. Something in her chest had loosened. Some tight grieving knot she'd carried for 6 months. Without realizing how heavy it had become, Gordon handed her a towel. "You're good," he said simply. "Better than good. But that's not why I'm glad you came tonight." "Why?" Then, Gordon's eyes drifted to the photograph of her father still resting on the bench. "Because some debts," he said quietly, "don't go away just because the man you owe them to is gone. Sometimes they wait, patient, until someone walks back through the door." Sienna didn't fully understand what he meant, not yet, but she felt the weight of it anyway. Heavy and real, settling into the room like dust finally disturbed after years of silence. "Come back Thursday," Gordon said, walking her to the door. "Officially, for the club." He paused, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Because I think we both have some things to figure out. About your father, about this town, about why I should have spoken up a long time ago and didn't." Sienna nodded, throat too tight to speak. She stepped out into the cool evening air, the dojo's bell chiming softly behind her. Above her, the sky had turned the color of an old bruise, deep purple fading into black. She walked home slowly, canvas bag empty now, the black belt tied around her waist beneath her jacket where no one could see it. But she could feel it. Like armor, like a promise, like the first thread of a truth finally beginning to unravel. Thursday came faster than Sienna expected. She arrived at the dojo early, but Caleb was already there, sitting on the bench near the door, lacing up a worn pair of training shoes. "You actually came," he said, surprised. "I half figured I scared you off with the whole Marcus thing." "Takes more than that," Sienna said, sitting beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the dojo quiet except for the soft hum of an old radiator in the corner. "Can I ask you something?" Sienna said finally. Caleb glanced over. "Sure, Marcus. What's his deal?" "Really?" Caleb's posture stiffened slightly. He looked down at his shoes, fingers fidgeting with the laces longer than necessary. "It's a long story. I've got time." Caleb exhaled slowly. "Marcus and I knew each other before college. Different high school, but our towns were close. Played the same rec league for a while when we were kids, and things were fine, actually, for a long time. Then sophomore year of high school, something changed in him. I don't know exactly what. Maybe pressure from his family. They've got money, old money, the kind that comes with expectations attached." Sienna nodded, slowly listening. "He started picking on smaller kids," Caleb continued. "At first it was just words. Then it got physical. My older brother Marcus, actually." Caleb stopped himself, jaw tightening. "Actually what?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus put my brother in the hospital," he said finally, voice low. "Junior year. Some fight that started over nothing. Ended with my brother's jaw wired shut for 6 weeks. Sienna felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Did anything happen to Marcus? Any consequences?" Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family settled it quietly. Paid for the hospital bill. It disappeared. Marcus got moved to a different school the next semester. No suspension, no record. Just gone. Like it never happened. And now he's here," Sienna said. "At the same school as you. Lucky me," Caleb said dryly. "I didn't even know until move-in day, saw him in the dining hall and about had a heart attack. Why didn't you transfer or report it?" Caleb shrugged, a tired, defeated motion. "Report it to who?" "Dean Whitmore. Family basically built half the science building. Nobody's going to risk that kind of money over a guy like me." Sienna's jaw tightened. "That's not how it should work." "No," Caleb agreed, "it's not. But it's how it does work. At least here." Sienna thought of her father. Of Gordon's words from 2 nights before, "Some debts don't go away just because the man you owe them to is gone." She thought about silence, about how much damage it could do left unspoken for too long. "Has he done anything to you?" she asked. "Here, I mean." At Millhaven, Caleb hesitated. "Small stuff," he admitted. "Knocking books out of my hands, making jokes in front of people. Nothing that would hold up as proof of anything. He's careful about that. Learned his lesson, I guess. Just enough to make my life miserable. Never enough to get caught." "That's not nothing," Sienna said quietly. Caleb looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "You're the first person who said that to me since I got here." Before Sienna could respond, the dojo door swung open, the bell chiming overhead. Gordon walked in, an armful of training pads under one arm. He paused at the sight of them sitting together. "Good," he said. "You're both early. Means you're serious. Get changed. We start in 10. Caleb stood, offering Sienna a small, grateful smile before heading toward the locker room. Sienna lingered a moment longer, watching Gordon set up the training pads with the careful precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. He looked up. "Gordon's fine, kid." "Mr. Pruitt makes me feel older than I already am, Gordon," she corrected. "Caleb just told me about Marcus. About what happened to his brother." Gordon's hand stilled on the training pad he was adjusting. "I know that story," he said quietly. "More of it than most people in this town. Why hasn't anyone done anything?" Gordon set the pad down, turned to face her fully. "Because doing something costs people something," he said. "Money, reputation, comfort. And most folks, when it comes down to it, aren't willing to pay that price for someone else's pain. Easier to look away. Tell yourself it's not your fight." "Is that what you did?" Sienna asked. "With my father?" The question hung in the air between them, heavier than she intended it to be. Gordon's eyes dropped briefly, then rose again, steady, honest in a way that surprised her. "Yes," he said simply. "That's exactly what I did, and I've spent a long time regretting it." Sienna swallowed hard. "Will you tell me? What happened to him?" Gordon glanced toward the locker room, where the sound of Caleb's bag being set down echoed faintly. "Soon," he said. "I promise you that. But your father's story and this boy's story, they're tangled together more than you know. Some truths land harder when you're ready to catch them properly." Before Sienna could press further, Caleb emerged from the locker room, gi tied neatly, expression brighter than she'd seen it all week. Gordon's posture shifted instantly. the old teacher returning, warm and commanding. "All right, line up both of you. Let's see what we're working with." For the next hour, the three of them moved through drills together. Gordon called out forms, corrected stances, occasionally demonstrated a technique with the fluid ease of a man who had done this for 50 years and never once forgotten how. Sienna noticed something as they trained. Caleb was better than he gave himself credit for. Hesitant, yes. Apologetic with every strike, like he was afraid of taking up space even within his own movements. But the bones of real skill were there, buried under years of being told, implicitly or explicitly, that he didn't deserve to take up room in the world. "You flinch before you even throw the punch," Sienna told him gently after Gordon stepped away to answer a phone call in the back office. "Why?" Caleb looked down. "Old habit, I guess, from Marcus?" "From everyone," Caleb said quietly. "You learn pretty fast that taking up space gets you noticed, and getting noticed isn't always safe." Sienna felt something ache in her chest, recognizing a kind of pain she hadn't expected to find here. In this small town, in this quiet boy who reminded her so little of herself, and yet somehow completely. Her father's old photograph, young, hesitant, hoping the world might someday make room for him. "You're allowed to take up space," she said. "More than you think." Caleb looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite belief, but maybe the beginning of it. "Easy for you to say," he said, but there was no bitterness in it. Just honesty. "You walk into a room like you already own it." "I wasn't always like this," Sienna admitted. "My dad taught me that confidence isn't about being fearless. It's about deciding fear doesn't get the final word." Caleb absorbed that for a moment, nodding slowly. "Your dad sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Sienna said. "I'm starting to think this whole town agrees with that more than I realized." Gordon returned from the office just then, his expression tighter than before, distracted in a way that hadn't been there earlier. "Everything okay?" Sienna asked. "Fine," Gordon said too quickly. "Just business. Bank stuff. Nothing for you two to worry about." Sienna noticed the way his hand lingered against the doorframe a moment too long. The way his eyes drifted, briefly, to the stack of unopened mail sitting on the front counter. Several envelopes marked with red lettering she couldn't quite read from this distance, but recognized the shape of trouble well enough. She filed it away, another loose thread in a town that seemed to be made entirely of them. After the lessons ended, Gordon walked them both to the door, locking up behind them with the slow, deliberate motions of a man closing a chapter for the night. "Same time Tuesday," he said. "Both of you will be here," Sienna said. Gordon lingered a moment, watching the two of them step out into the cooling evening. Something in his expression softened, the way an old man's face does when he sees something he didn't expect to see again. "You two remind me of something," he said quietly. "What's that?" Caleb asked. "Of what this place used to be," Gordon said. Before it got quiet, 4 people forgot why dojos like this one matter in a town like this. He didn't explain further, just nodded once, like a man closing a door on a thought he wasn't ready to finish, and disappeared back inside. Sienna and Caleb stood for a moment under the porch light, the gravel lot empty around them, crickets starting their evening chorus in the tall grass beyond the fence line. "He does that a lot," Caleb said. "Starts something, doesn't finish it. You've noticed too." Hard not to," Caleb said. "I think there's a lot this town doesn't talk about. Not just Marcus, not just your dad. Just things people decided a long time ago weren't worth the trouble of saying out loud." Sienna thought about that as they began their walk back toward campus, the dojo's porch light shrinking behind them into a small, warm dot against the darkening evening. "You think that's healthy?" she asked. "All that silence?" Caleb shrugged. "Think silence is just procrastination wearing a nicer coat." Sienna laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "That's oddly poetic for a guy who flinches before throwing a punch." "Hidden depths," Caleb said, a small grin tugging at his mouth. "I contain multitudes." It was the lightest she'd seen him all week. The first genuine joke, unburdened by the careful, apologetic posture he usually carried like a second backpack. For a moment, walking beside him under the darkening Millhaven sky, Sienna allowed herself to simply enjoy the evening. Not the mystery of her father, not the looming shadow of Marcus Holt, not the grief she still carried, folded small and careful, like the black belt she now wore openly instead of hidden in a bag. Just the simple, ordinary comfort of walking beside someone who didn't ask her to be anything other than exactly who she was. It didn't last long. A car horn blared from somewhere down the street, followed by laughter, loud, performative, kind, designed to be heard rather than shared. Caleb's posture stiffened immediately, shoulders curling inward like a turtle retreating into its shell. Sienna followed his gaze, A pickup truck idled at the intersection ahead, windows down, music thumping low. Sat in the passenger seat, one arm draped out the window. His two boyfriends from the student fair crowded in beside him. "Foster," Marcus called out, voice carrying easily across the quiet street. "Out late with your new girlfriend. Didn't take you for a ladies' man." His chef's friends laughed on cue. Caleb said nothing, eyes fixed on the sidewalk ahead, pace quickening slightly. Sienna didn't quicken her pace at all. "Evening, Marcus," she called back, voice calm, almost pleasant. "Out late terrorizing freshmen? Didn't take you for a man who needs an audience to feel important." The laughter from the truck died instantly. Marcus's expression hardened, the easy smirk slipping for just a moment before he caught it and forced it back into place. "You've got a mouth on you," he said. "New girls usually learn to be quiet around here pretty fast." "I'm a slow learner," Sienna said, "especially when it comes to things that don't matter." One of Marcus's friends muttered something, and Marcus barked a short laugh, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Careful," he said, the warmth completely gone from his voice now. "Town like this, everybody knows everybody. Things have a way of getting complicated for new people who don't know their place yet." "Funny," Sienna said. "I was about to say the same thing about people who never learned theirs." The truck idled a moment longer, tension hanging thick in the cooling air. Then Marcus rolled his eyes, muttered something to his friends, and the truck pulled away, tires crunching against gravel, music fading into the distance. Caleb let out a long, shaky breath. "You really shouldn't provoke him like that." "I didn't provoke anything," Sienna said. "I just didn't shrink. That's the part that scares me," Caleb admitted. "Most people shrink. It's safer." "Safer isn't always better," Sienna said. "Sometimes it just means the bullies get to keep winning quietly." Caleb was silent for a long moment, processing that. "You really believe that?" he asked. "That standing up to guys like Marcus actually changes anything?" Sienna thought of her father, of the photograph in Gordon's dojo, of the way Gordon's voice had cracked, just slightly, every time he talked about staying quiet too long. "I think," she said slowly, "that silence is a debt too. And somebody eventually to start paying it down." Caleb didn't respond right away. But something in his posture had shifted slightly by the time they reached the fork in the path. Less curled inward, a fraction more willing to take up space. It wasn't much, but it was something. The walk back from the dojo took 20 minutes if Sienna cut through the park. That evening she did. The sky had turned a deep amber, the kind of light that made even the cracked sidewalks of Millhaven look almost beautiful. Caleb walked beside her, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, sneakers scuffing against gravel. "Thanks," he said, after a long stretch of silence, "for today, for, I don't know. Talking to me like I'm a person instead of a punching bag." "You are a person," Sienna said. "A pretty decent one, from what I can tell." Caleb huffed a small laugh. "High praise from someone I met 4 days ago." "I'm a fast judge of character," Sienna said. "Comes with the training, I guess. You learn to read people quickly. Who's dangerous? Who's just scared and hiding it badly? Which one's Marcus?" Sienna considered the question seriously. "Both. Maybe. Dangerous because he's scared. That's usually the worst combination." They walked in silence for a while, passing the old gazebo at the park's center. Paint peeling, faded banner from some long-past town festival still clinging stubbornly to one railing. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "Sure." "Back at the dojo, with Gordon. You guys were talking about your dad like something happened to him, something bad." Sienna's steps slowed slightly. "He died accident, technically. But I don't think that's the whole story." Caleb's expression softened. "I'm sorry, thanks," Sienna said, and meant it. "Gordon says there's more to it. Something that happened a long time ago here in Millhaven. That's connected somehow." "That's heavy," Caleb said quietly, carrying that without knowing the full picture. "Yeah," Sienna admitted, "it is." They reached the edge of the park, where the path split. One direction towards Caleb's dorm, the other toward Earl's house on the quiet end of Birchwood Lane. "This is me," Caleb said, gesturing toward Brightwood Hall in the distance. "See you Tuesday?" Sienna asked. Caleb smiled, small but genuine. "Wouldn't miss it." He hesitated a moment before turning to leave. "Hey Sienna, yeah? Thanks for sitting with me at that table." "First day. Nobody's done that in a long time." Sienna held his gaze. "Anytime, Caleb." "I mean that," he nodded. Something lighter in his posture than there had been all week, and walked off toward his dorm. Sienna continued alone, the evening settling into that particular quiet that only small towns seem to know how to hold. As she approached her grandfather's house, she noticed the porch light already on, a single silhouette rocking slowly in one of the porch chairs. Earl looked up as she climbed the steps. "Good day." "Long one," Sienna said, sitting in the chair beside him. Good, though. I think you went to the dojo, Earl said. It wasn't a question, you knew. Figured you would, eventually. Earl's rocking chair creaked softly. Gordon call you by your dad's name yet? Sienna turned to him, surprised. How did you know that? Earl's smile was small, knowing, tired in a way that suggested decades of carrying something heavy and quiet. Because Gordon Pruitt has been waiting 15 years for someone to walk back through that door, he said. I just didn't expect it to be you. Not this soon. What happened to my dad, Grandpa? Really happened. Not the version everyone tells me to make me feel better. Earl was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening street, hands folded in his lap. There's a town like this in every state, he said finally. Pretty on the surface, quiet streets, friendly waves, church bells on Sunday. But every town's got something buried underneath all that prettiness. A debt nobody's paid. A silence, is that what happened to Dad? A debt? A silence? Earl turned to her, eyes glistening faintly in the porch light. Your father tried to do the right thing once, he said quietly. A long time ago right here in Millhaven. And the town wasn't ready to hear it. Cost him more than any of us realized at the time. What did he try to do? Earl reached over, patted her hand gently, the way he had when she was small and frightened of thunderstorms. Give it time, kid, he said. The truth's coming. Pieces of it, at least. Gordon's got his part. I've got mine. And I think this town's about to learn it can't keep burying things forever. Sienna looked out at the quiet street, the porch light humming softly above them, the wind chime swaying gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere out there, in the dark beyond the streetlights, Marcus Holt was probably laughing with his friends, untouched, unaccountable, the way boys like him always seemed to be in towns built to protect names like his. And somewhere closer, in a dorm room not far from here, Caleb Foster was probably lying awake, replaying every flinch, every apology he'd learned to offer simply for existing. Sienna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the black belt still wrapped around her waist beneath her jacket. She thought of her father's smile in that old photograph. She thought of Gordon's voice, heavy with 15 years of regret. She thought of the unopened envelopes stacked on the dojo counter, marked in red. Whatever debt this town owed, to her father, to Caleb, to people like Gordon who'd stayed silent too long. Sienna had the growing, certain feeling that it was about to come due, and for the first time since her father's funeral, she didn't feel like she was simply surviving each day. She felt like she was standing exactly where she was meant to stand, ready. Quiet, waiting for the moment. The truth would finally need someone brave enough to carry it. Earl rose slowly from his rocking chair, joints cracking faintly in the cool evening air, paused at the screen door, hand resting on the frame. Your dad used to sit out here with me, he said quietly, right where you're sitting now. Same kind of quiet, same kind of waiting. What was he waiting for? Earl looked back at her, eyes soft in the porch light. The same thing you're waiting for, I expect, he said. Permission to stop being careful. To finally say the thing everybody's been too scared to say out loud. He went inside, leaving the door open behind him, warm yellow light spilling out onto the porch boards. Sienna sat a while longer, alone with the crickets and the wind chime and the wide, dark sky stretching out over Millhaven. Somewhere across town, a dojo sat quiet and locked for the night, its walls holding a story 15 years unfinished. Somewhere in a dorm room, a boy who flinched before throwing punches lay awake, daring to imagine what it might feel like to stop apologizing for existing. And somewhere in a house with too much money and not enough honesty, a young man slept soundly, certain that nothing in this small, quiet town could ever touch him. He was wrong. Sienna didn't know it yet, not fully. But sitting there on that porch, the black belt still tied beneath her jacket, she could feel it coming the way you feel a storm before the first drop of rain falls. Something old was about to wake up in Millhaven. And she was standing right at the center of it. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the dojo. 3 weeks of Caleb standing a little straighter each time. 3 weeks of Gordon watching Sienna with the quiet, careful attention of a man piecing together a story one frame at a time. 3 weeks of Marcus Holt growing bolder. It started small. It always does. A shoulder check in the hallway, hard enough to knock Caleb's books loose. A joke shouted across the dining hall, loud enough to make sure the whole room laughed at the right moment. Textbook, accidentally dropped in a puddle outside the library. None of it big enough to report, all of it big enough to wear a person down. Sienna watched it happen in pieces, the way you watch a slow leak in a roof. No single drop matters. The ceiling stains anyway. You don't have to walk me to class, Caleb said one Wednesday morning, falling into step beside her outside Brightwood Hall. "I'm not your responsibility, I know," Sienna said. "I'm walking this way anyway. You have a chemistry lecture in the opposite building. Guess I like the scenic route." Caleb gave her a look, equal parts grateful and exasperated. "You're a terrible liar." "I'm an excellent liar," Sienna said. "I'm just choosing not to use that skill on you." He laughed, and for a moment the tension in his shoulders eased. It didn't last. They turned the corner near the science building, and there was Marcus, leaning against the brick wall with two friends, waiting with the patient cruelty of someone who had nothing better to do with his morning. "Foster," Marcus called out, "brought your bodyguard again, I see." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. "You know," Marcus continued, falling into step a few feet behind them, voice carrying easily across the courtyard, "it's kind of sad watching a girl fight your battles for you. Real pathetic, actually." Sienna didn't stop walking. "Didn't turn around, funny. I was just thinking how sad it is, watching three grown men spend their morning following two people who clearly don't want their company." One of Marcus's friends snickered before catching himself. Marcus's expression hardened. "Careful. You're starting to sound like you think you're somebody important around here." "I don't need to be important," Sienna said. "I just need to not be afraid of you." Which, it turns out, isn't that hard. Marcus's footsteps stopped. For a second, Sienna thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. "You have no idea what you're getting into," Marcus said, voice lower now, the performance dropping away to something colder underneath. "This isn't your town. You don't know how things work here. People who think they're tougher than they are tend to learn that lesson the hard way." Sienna finally turned to face him, expression calm, almost bored. "Is that a threat, Marcus?" "It's a warning," he said. "There's a difference, funny," Sienna said. "From where I'm standing, it sounds exactly the same." For a long moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, the morning crowd of students flowing past, oblivious to the quiet standoff happening in the middle of the courtyard. Then Marcus laughed, short and forced, and turned away, his friends trailing after him. "You're going to regret not being scared of me," he called back over his shoulder. "I'll take my chances," Sienna said, mostly to herself. Caleb let out a long breath beside her. "He's getting worse. Have you noticed?" "I've noticed. Why now? Why this semester?" Sienna considered the question seriously as they continued walking. Maybe because for the first time someone's not flinching. Guys like Marcus, they need people to be scared. It's basically the only currency they understand. Take that away, and they don't know what to do with themselves. So what happens when guys like that run out of currency? Sienna's expression turned thoughtful. Generally, they panic. Panicking people make mistakes. "Comforting," Caleb said dryly. "It should be," Sienna said. "Mistakes are how people like that finally get caught." They reached the science building, the morning crowd thinning as students filtered into their first classes. Caleb paused at the door, hand on the handle, looking back at her. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Something I haven't told anyone here." "Of course, my brother's still scared of crowds," Caleb said quietly. 3 years later, won't go to concerts, won't sit in the middle of a movie theater, has to know exactly where the exits are in any room he walks into. Marcus did that to him, not just the broken jaw. The fear that doesn't heal even after the bones do. Sienna's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I'm not telling you for sympathy," Caleb said. "I'm telling you because I think you're the first person who might actually understand why this matters so much to me. Why I can't just let it slide the way everyone tells me to." "I understand," Sienna said, "more than you probably realize." Caleb studied her for a moment, something searching in his expression. "Your dad. The thing you mentioned with Gordon, is that part of why you understand?" "I think so," Sienna admitted. "I don't have the full story yet, but I think it's close to the surface now. Closer than it's been in 15 years, Caleb nodded slowly, like he sensed there was more beneath her words than she was ready to share. "Whatever it is," he said, "I hope you find it, and I hope it doesn't hurt as much as you're bracing for." He disappeared into the building, leaving Sienna standing alone on the steps, the morning sun warm against her face, the weight of his words settling into her chest. That afternoon, Sienna sat in the back row of her American history seminar, half listening to a lecture on Reconstruction-era policy, mind drifting instead toward Gordon's dojo and the conversation she still hadn't had. 3 weeks, then Gordon still hadn't told her the rest of her father's story. 3 weeks of careful half-truths. Of soon and not yet and you deserve it whole. She was beginning to run out of patience. After class, she walked straight to the dojo instead of home, arriving an hour before the evening session was scheduled to begin. Gordon was in the back office, hunched over a desk cluttered with papers, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "You're early. I think it's time," Sienna said simply. Gordon's hand stilled over the papers in front of him. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. He set down his pen, removed his glasses, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said. "I suppose you're right. I've put this off long enough." Sienna sat, heart pounding harder than she expected. Gordon was quiet for a long moment, gathering himself, the weight of 15 years pressing visibly into the lines of his face. "Your father," he began slowly, "wasn't just my student. By the time he turned 18, he was practically family. Spent more hours in this dojo than he did at his own house some weeks. What happened to him here?" Gordon's eyes drifted toward the photograph wall, settling on the same picture Sienna had seen weeks before. "There was another boy," he said, "younger than your father, quiet kid. Came from a rough situation at home, found his way here looking for somewhere steady. Your father took him under his wing, taught him forms after hours. Looked out for him at school like Caleb," Sienna said quietly. "More than you know what happened to him, the boy?" Gordon's jaw tightened. There was a family in this town back then. Wealthy, influential. Their son made a habit of tormenting smaller kids, the same way Marcus does now. Your father saw it happening to this boy and decided to do something about it. What did he do? He documented it, Gordon said. Wrote everything down, dates, details, witnesses. Took it to the school. Took it to the family's lawyers when the school did nothing. Tried to do this the right way, the careful way, the way that wouldn't get anyone hurt worse than they already were. Sienna's chest tightened. And? Gordon's expression turned heavy, shamed. And the family had more money than the truth could compete with. They twisted it. Made it look like your father was the troublemaker, stirring up drama, threatening a respected family's reputation for no good reason. The school sided with money, like schools tend to do when money's loud enough. What happened to my dad? He got quietly pushed out, Gordon said. Not expelled, exactly. Just made so uncomfortable, so isolated, so doubted by everyone around him, that staying became impossible. Family moved away within the year. Sienna felt something hot and furious rising in her chest. And you? What did you do? Gordon's eyes met hers, raw with old guilt. I believed him, he said quietly. I always believed him. But I had a business to protect, families to keep happy. I told myself staying quiet was the responsible thing. The safe thing, he paused, voice breaking slightly. I let an 18-year-old boy carry the weight of doing the right thing completely alone. Sienna's eyes stung. Why didn't you ever reach out to him? Tell him you were sorry? I tried, Gordon said. Sent a letter. He wrote back eventually, told me he understood, told me he didn't blame me. Gordon's voice cracked. That forgiveness was somehow worse than if he'd hated me. I never stopped feeling like I owed him something I could never pay back. The office fell silent except for the soft hum of the old radiator in the corner. That's why you trained me, Sienna said slowly, understanding dawning. These past 3 weeks, it's not just about karate, no, Gordon admitted. It's about paying down a debt I've carried half my life. Your father deserved someone in his corner back then. I'm not going to make that same mistake twice. Sienna wiped at her eyes, the pieces finally settling into place. The boy, she said, the one my dad protected. What happened to him? Do you know? Gordon's expression shifted, something complicated crossing his features. His name was Robert Foster. He said quietly. Caleb's father. Sienna's breath caught. Caleb's dad, she repeated. My father protected Caleb's father. And now history's repeating itself, Gordon finished. Different family. Same money. Same silence. Same boy too scared to take up space in the world. Sienna sat back in her chair, the weight of the revelation settling heavy in her chest. And Marcus, she said slowly, his family. Are they? The same family that ran your father out of town, Gordon confirmed. The Holts have owned half this county for 3 generations. Marcus's grandfather was the one who buried your father's complaint. His father kept the tradition going when Caleb's older brother got hurt. And now Marcus is simply doing what every generation of that family's been allowed to do since before any of us were born. The silence that followed felt enormous. Why didn't you tell me this the first day? Sienna finally asked. Gordon's eyes were tired, ancient with regret. Because some truths need a person ready to carry them. I needed to know you could handle the weight of it before I handed it over. And now, Gordon said, I think you're exactly the person this town's been waiting 15 years for. Sienna didn't sleep well that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan ticking slowly overhead, replaying Gordon's words over and over until they blurred together into something too heavy to hold still. Her father, 18 years old, trying to protect a boy nobody else would protect, punished for it, run out of the only home he'd ever known, and somehow, impossibly, here she was, 18 years old herself, standing in the exact same spot, protecting the son of the boy her father once protected. Didn't feel like coincidence, it felt like something closer to inheritance. The next morning, she found her grandfather already up, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, one clearly poured for her. "You talked to Gordon," he said. "Not a question. You knew the whole story," Sienna said, sitting across from him. "This whole time." Earl's expression turned gentle, apologetic. "I knew pieces of it. Your father never told me everything, not exactly. Some things a son protects his old man from, even when he shouldn't. Why didn't you ever mention Robert Foster, or the Holts?" "Because your father asked me not to," Earl said simply. "Said it was old history. Said dragging it back up wouldn't fix what already happened, and would only put a target on people who didn't deserve one." "Like Caleb," Sienna said. "Like Caleb," Earl agreed. "Your father carried guilt about that family for the rest of his life, you know. Felt responsible for what happened to the Fosters even though none of it was his fault. Believed if he'd just handled things differently, maybe things would have turned out better for them." Sienna's throat tightened. "He carried that guilt and never told me?" "Some men measure love by what they choose not to burden their kids with," Earl said quietly. "Doesn't always work out the way they intend." Sienna thought about that for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. "Grandpa," she said finally, "what do I do with all this? Now that I know?" Earl considered the question carefully, the way a man considers something he's thought about for a very long time, waiting for the right person to ask. "You finish what your father started," he said. "Carefully. Smartly. Not the way he did it, alone with no one in his corner. You've got Gordon. You've got me. You've got that boy, Caleb, who clearly trusts you more than he trusts most people in this town. And if it doesn't work? If the Holts bury it again the way they buried it before?" Earl reached across the table, took her hand in his weathered grip. "Then at least this time," he said, "somebody fought. Last time, your father fought completely alone, and the silence afterward nearly broke him. This time, you won't be alone. That's the difference that actually matters." That evening at the dojo, Gordon ran them through an unusually quiet session. No sparring, no drills. Just forms, slow and deliberate, the kind meant to settle a restless mind rather than build a stronger body. "Strength," Gordon said. Watching Sienna move through a sequence she'd practiced 1,000 times before, "isn't about hitting harder than the other guy. Your father understood that better than almost anyone I ever trained." "Then, what is it?" Sienna asked, holding a stance, muscles trembling slightly with the effort. "It's choosing the right moment," Gordon said. "Knowing when patience serves you better than force. Knowing the difference between fighting because you have to, and fighting because you want to feel powerful." Caleb, sitting on the bench nearby catching his breath, spoke up quietly. "Which one was my dad? When he got hurt?" Gordon's expression softened. "Father never threw a single punch in that whole mess, Caleb. Not once. The bruises he carried because he refused to fight back, even when fighting back would have been justified. Some people show their strength by how much they're willing to endure without losing who they are." Caleb absorbed that, something shifting visibly behind his eyes. "I always thought he was just weak," Caleb admitted quietly. "He never talks about it, never explains why he flinches sometimes, out of nowhere, for no reason I can see." "He's not weak," Gordon said firmly. "He survived something that should have broken him, and he built a life anyway. That takes a different kind of strength than the kind people usually celebrate." Sienna lowered her stance, watching Caleb process this new understanding of his own father. "Maybe that's the kind of strength we need now," she said. "Not the kind that wins fights. The kind that survives them long enough for the truth to finally catch up." Gordon nodded slowly. "Now you're starting to understand why your father was the best student I ever had." After the session ended, Caleb lingered by the door while Gordon locked up, glancing back at Sienna with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something steadier, less apologetic than usual. "I think I want to call my brother tonight," he said. "Tell him what Gordon said. About strength. About what he actually survived." "Think he'd want to hear that," Sienna said. "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe it'll just open something neither of us is ready for. But I think I'm done pretending it doesn't matter." He walked off into the evening, posture a little taller than it had been an hour before, and Sienna watched him go with a quiet, hopeful ache in her chest. Some wounds, she was learning, didn't heal in silence. They only healed once someone finally had the courage to name them out loud. The weekend before everything changed, passed quietly, almost deceptively so. Saturday morning, Sienna helped grandfather replace a cracked pane of glass in the kitchen window, the two of them working in comfortable silence, passing tools back and forth the way people do when words aren't necessary to feel close to someone. "You've been different lately," Earl said, holding a strip of caulk steady, while Sienna pressed the new pane into place. "Lighter, somehow. Even with everything you've learned this week, I think I finally feel useful," Sienna admitted. "Like I'm not just surviving something. Like I'm actually doing something that matters." Earl smiled, the expression creasing deep lines around his eyes. "Father used to say something similar, you know, right before things got hard for him. Should that worry me?" "Maybe a little," Earl said honestly. "But I'd rather you feel useful and a little worried than safe and completely numb. Second one's a worse way to live, in my experience." Sunday evening, Sienna attended an extra training session at the dojo, one Gordon hadn't scheduled but offered anyway, sensing she needed the grounding more than the technique. "Your forms have gotten sharper," Gordon observed, watching her move through a sequence with renewed focus. "Sharper, but slower. More deliberate. You're not rushing through this like you did your first week." "I think I finally understand what you meant," Sienna said, settling into a low stance. "About strength being patience, not speed." "Good," Gordon said. "Because patience is about to matter more than it ever has." He didn't elaborate, but something in his tone made Sienna pause. "You think something's coming," she said. "It wasn't a question, I think," Gordon said carefully, "that men like Marcus Holt don't simply stop escalating on their own. Especially not after losing face in front of an audience the way he did last week. Pride like his doesn't absorb a loss quietly. It looks for somewhere else to put the anger." Sienna thought of Caleb immediately. "You think he'll go after Caleb again?" "I think it's worth being ready," Gordon said simply. "That's all I'm saying." She left the dojo that night with Gordon's warning settling uneasily in her chest, the kind of feeling that sits at the base of your spine and refuses to fully explain itself. By Monday morning, it had already come true. The following Monday, everything changed. Sienna arrived at the dining hall for lunch to find Caleb already seated, head down, shoulders trembling slightly in a way she recognized immediately. She slid into the seat across from him. "What happened?" Caleb didn't look up right away. When he finally did, there was a thin cut above his eyebrow already starting to bruise. "It's nothing. It's clearly not nothing," Sienna said, its voice tight. "What happened?" Caleb stared down at his untouched tray. "Marcus and his friends caught me behind the gym. Said I'd been talking too much. Said I needed reminding what happens to people who think a karate club makes them tough." Sienna's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "Did anyone see?" "A couple people walked by," Caleb said. "Nobody stopped. Nobody ever stops." "Did you report it?" Caleb laughed, hollow and humorless. "Report it to who? Dean Whitmore's office?" "Last time someone in my family tried that, it ended with my brother's jaw wired shut and Marcus walking away clean. I don't exactly have high hopes." Sienna's jaw tightened. "Can't keep happening. What choice do I have?" Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not like you, Sienna. I don't have 10 years of training. I don't have a black belt hidden under my jacket. I just have to take it and hope eventually he gets bored." "He's not going to get bored," Sienna said firmly. "Guys like Marcus don't get bored. They escalate every single time until somebody finally makes them stop." That afternoon, word of what happened spread quietly through the small circle of students who actually paid attention to things like this. By the time Sienna made it to her last class, she'd heard 3 different versions of the story, each one slightly worse than the last. She found Marcus near the quad after classes ended, leaning against the same brick wall as always, performing his usual routine for an audience of 2. "Marcus," he turned, smirk already forming. "Look who it is, here to lecture me again? You hurt Caleb today." "Caleb's clumsy," Marcus said. "Walked into a door frame probably. Heard he does that a lot." "Don't," Sienna said, voice dangerously calm. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you think I'm stupid enough to believe that." Marcus's smirk faltered slightly, something colder replacing it. "Careful. You're talking to me like you think you're untouchable. Like you think there's nothing I could do that would actually matter to someone like you. I think," Sienna said, "that you're a coward who's only ever been brave when your family's money was standing behind you, making sure you never faced consequences." The courtyard around them went quiet. A small crowd of students had started to gather, drawn by the unmistakable charge in the air that precedes something about to happen. Marcus's expression darkened completely now, the performance dropping away entirely. "You don't know anything about my family. I know more than you think," Sienna said. I know what your grandfather did to my father 18 years before either of us was born. I know what your family does, generation after generation, to anyone who isn't scared enough of your money to stay quiet. Marcus's face went pale, then red, fury replacing whatever composure he'd been holding on to. You need to shut your mouth, he said, stepping closer, voice low and dangerous now. You don't know what you're talking about. I think I do, Sienna said, not moving an inch. And I think it scares you. Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing her by the shoulder, shoving her backward hard enough that she stumbled half a step. The crowd gasped collectively. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Sienna's body responded before her mind fully caught up, 10 years of muscle memory taking over with calm, controlled precision. She pivoted, caught Marcus's wrist, redirected his own momentum against him. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. More startled than hurt, she stood over him, arms relaxed at her sides, breathing steady. I didn't hit you, she said, voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. I just made sure you couldn't hit me. There's a difference, even if you've never had to learn it. Marcus scrambled to his feet, face burning with humiliation in front of the gathering crowd. Several phones already raised, recording. You're going to regret that, he hissed. I doubt it, Sienna said calmly. But as Marcus stormed away, his 2 friends trailing nervously behind him, Sienna noticed something that made her stomach tighten. One of the students recording the altercation wasn't a stranger. It was Devin Holt, Marcus's cousin. Quiet, careful, rarely seen without an expression of carefully maintained neutrality. She lowered her phone slowly, eyes meeting Sienna's across the dispersing crowd. For just a moment, something passed between them. Not hostility, something closer to recognition. Like Devin had been waiting quietly for someone to finally do what she'd never had the courage to do herself. Then Devin turned and walked away without a word. Summons came the next morning. A note slipped under the door of Sienna's dorm room. Official letterhead, Dean Whitmore's office, requesting her presence immediately. Earl drove her to campus himself, jaw set tight the entire ride. Whatever they say in there, he told her, pulling up outside the administration building, you tell the truth. Every bit of it. Don't shrink, don't apologize for something you didn't start. I know, Grandpa, I know you know, Earl said. Just needed to say it anyway. Dean Whitmore's office was exactly what Sienna expected. Heavy wooden furniture, framed degrees on the walls, the particular stuffy formality of a room designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Dean Whitmore himself sat behind an enormous desk, a thin, nervous-looking man in his 50s, the kind of administrator who had clearly spent his career avoiding confrontation rather than resolving it. Gordon sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sienna hadn't expected him to be there, but something in her chest eased slightly at the sight of him. Miss Walcott, Dean Whitmore began, voice tight with barely concealed discomfort. We've received reports of an altercation yesterday afternoon involving yourself and Marcus Holt. I'm aware, Sienna said evenly, taking the empty seat beside Gordon. Several witnesses describe a physical confrontation. Marcus grabbed me and shoved me, Sienna said. I defended myself. That's the entirety of what happened. Dean Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. The Holt family has expressed significant concern about the incident. They're requesting disciplinary action. Gordon spoke up before Sienna could respond, voice calm but edged with steel. Has anyone bothered asking what led to Marcus putting his hands on her in the first place? That's not entirely the point, Mr. Pruitt. It's exactly the point, Gordon interrupted. This young man assaulted a freshman just last week, leaving a visible injury. And the week before that, and the year before that, his cousin ended up in the hospital because of him. Seems to me the only thing consistent in this pattern is that nobody in this building has ever once held him accountable. Dean Whitmore's face reddened. The matter with the foster boy was settled privately years ago. Settled, Gordon repeated, voice hardening. Is that what we're calling it? Buried, more like. Same way an incident 18 years ago involving a different Holt and a different student got buried, conveniently, right before anyone bothered to actually investigate it properly. The room went silent. Dean Whitmore's composure cracked slightly. I wasn't Dean 18 years ago, Mr. Pruitt. No, Gordon agreed. But the family writing checks to this institution hasn't changed. And it seems like that's mattered a great deal more than the truth. Every single time, Sienna watched the exchange, something tightening hopefully in her chest. For the first time, she felt like someone in a position of authority was finally saying out loud what everyone quietly understood but never dared speak. Dean Whitmore cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Be that as it may, the security footage from yesterday's incident would clarify exactly what occurred. I've requested it be pulled for review. Good, Sienna said firmly. I have nothing to hide. Dean Whitmore nodded stiffly, dismissing them with visible relief at the prospect of delaying further confrontation. Outside the building, Gordon walked beside Sienna in silence for a moment before speaking. That went about as well as I expected, he said. Meaning not very well at all, Sienna said, meaning exactly that, Gordon confirmed. Men like Whitmore don't make decisions based on right and wrong. They make decisions based on which side scares them less. So, what happens now? Now, Gordon said, we wait and see if that security footage actually tells the truth. Or if it conveniently disappears the way truth tends to disappear in this town, when the wrong family's name gets attached to it. That night, Sienna told Earl everything that had happened in Dean Whitmore's office, the words tumbling out faster than she intended, 3 weeks of careful restraint finally giving way. Earl listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. 18 years, he said finally, voice quiet but hard. 18 years and that family still gets to write the rules everyone else has to live by. Gordon thinks the footage might disappear, she said. Conveniently. Wouldn't surprise me, Earl said. Your father used to say the Holts didn't need to break the law. They just needed to make sure the law was always looking somewhere else when they did something wrong. What do I do if that happens? If the footage disappears and it's just my word against Marcus's? Earl was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your father once told me something I never forgot, he said. He said the truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone patient enough to keep saying it. Long after everyone else has gotten tired of listening, Sienna held on to those words for the next 2 days, turning them over like a stone in her pocket, something solid to hold on to while she waited. He wasn't wrong to worry. 2 days later, word came back through campus gossip before it ever reached Sienna officially. The security footage from the courtyard conveniently had been corrupted, a technical malfunction, the administration claimed. Nothing salvageable. Sienna sat with Caleb on the dojo bench that evening, the news settling heavy between them. They're going to bury it, Caleb said quietly. Just like they buried everything else. Maybe not, Sienna said. Caleb looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Sienna reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, scrolled to a video file she'd saved 3 weeks earlier. The very first time Marcus had cornered Caleb at the student fair, recorded quietly from across the quad. Just in case, I started recording him, she said. After that first day. Figured someone like that doesn't stop on his own. Figured eventually evidence would matter. Caleb stared at the screen, stunned. You've had this the whole time? I have more than this, Sienna said. 3 weeks of small moments. Nothing dramatic enough to matter on its own. But together? She let the sentence hang, watching understanding dawn slowly across Caleb's face. Together, it's a pattern, he finished. Not just one incident anyone can explain away. Exactly. Before either of them could say more, the dojo's front door swung open, the bell chiming softly overhead. Devin Holt stood in the doorway, hesitant, eyes wide with something that looked very much like fear. I need to talk to you, she said, voice trembling slightly. Both of you, please. Gordon, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly excused himself to the back office, leaving the three of them alone in the dojo's main training space. Davin sat stiffly on the edge of the bench, hands twisting nervously in her lap. I saw what happened, she said finally. In the courtyard, I recorded it, I know, Sienna said carefully. I saw you, I deleted it, Devin admitted, voice cracking slightly, right after. Marcus found out I'd recorded it and she stopped, swallowing hard. He made it very clear what would happen if that video ever got shown to anyone. Caleb's expression hardened. What kind of clear? Devin's eyes filled with tears she clearly fought to hold back. You don't understand what it's like, being part of that family. Everything is image. Everything is reputation. My uncle controls half the family's business interests. Marcus is supposed to inherit the rest someday. If anything threatens that, threatens how the family looks to this town. She broke off, shaking her head. Threaten you, Sienna said quietly. To keep you quiet, not threats exactly, Devin said. Just reminders about scholarships, about family events I wouldn't be welcome at anymore, about how disappointing it would be if I couldn't be trusted to protect the family name. That's still control, Sienna said. Just dressed up nicer. Devin wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly. I've watched Marcus do this for years. To Caleb's brother. To half a dozen other kids nobody talks about anymore because they transferred schools or just stopped fighting back. I've hated every second of it, and I've never said a single word. Why now? Caleb asked. Why tell us now? Devon was quiet for a long moment, gathering herself. Because yesterday, she said finally, I watched a girl who'd been here 3 weeks do something I haven't had the courage to do in 3 years. Stand up to him. Actually, stand up to him. Her voice trembled. And it made me realize how much I hate what my silence has cost people. Sienna leaned forward slightly. Will you say that, officially, to Dean Whitmore? Devon's face went pale. If I do that, my family will never forgive me. I'll lose everything, or, Sienna said gently, you'll finally stop losing yourself a little more every single day you stay quiet. Devon stared at her, something shifting behind her eyes. I still have the video, she admitted quietly. I told Marcus I deleted it. I lied. I backed it up somewhere he doesn't know about. I think some part of me always knew I'd need it eventually. Caleb's breath caught. You still have proof. I have more than that one video, Devon said. I've been documenting things for almost a year. Quietly, just in case. Conversations. Texts where Marcus talks about what he's done to people. I never knew what I was going to do with it. I think I was just too scared to do nothing and too scared to do something. The three of them sat in heavy silence, the weight of what Devon was offering settling slowly into the room. If you come forward, Sienna said carefully, you won't be alone in this. I have my own evidence. Gordon will back you up. My grandfather knows the whole history of what your family's done to mine. This isn't just your fight anymore, Devon. It hasn't been for a long time. Devon's eyes filled with tears again, but this time something steadier moved beneath them. My grandmother used to tell me, she said quietly, that every family eventually has to decide what kind of legacy it wants to leave behind. I think I'm finally ready to decide that for myself, instead of letting Marcus decide it for all of us. Gordon reappeared from the back office just then, having clearly heard enough of the conversation through the thin walls to understand what was happening. Devon Holt, he said quietly. Your father used to train here too, you know. Long before any of this, Devon looked up, surprised. He never mentioned that. There's a lot this town doesn't mention, Gordon said. But for what it's worth, your father was a decent kid. Quieter than his brother. I always wondered what happened to that decency once your family's business got bigger and your family's silence got louder. Offensive absorbed that, something resolute settling into her expression. I want to help fix this, she said. However I can. Sienna looked between Caleb, still pale but standing straighter than she'd seen him in weeks, and Devon, fragile but finally choosing courage over comfort, and felt something steady settle into her own chest. 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived in Millhaven, carrying nothing but grief and a folded black belt, looking only for somewhere quiet to heal. Now, she sat in the center of something far larger than herself. Her father's unfinished story, Caleb's family's old wound, Devon's rebellion, Gordon's 15 years of guilt, all converging towards something that finally, after decades of careful silence, refused to be buried any longer. Dean Whitmore set a hearing date, Gordon said quietly, breaking the silence. 2 days from now, the Holt family's demanding Sienna be formally disciplined. Given what we just learned, I think it's time we made sure that hearing covers a great deal more than anyone on that side of the table is expecting. Sienna felt her pulse quicken, not with fear this time, but with something closer to purpose. 2 days, she repeated. 2 days, Gordon confirmed. Time enough to prepare, not time enough to lose our nerve. They spent the next 2 days the way soldiers prepare for something they can't undo once it starts. Sienna transferred every video file to 3 separate places, refusing to let a single piece of evidence rest in only one location ever again. Devon brought a folder of print messages, dates carefully highlighted, a year of quiet documentation finally given purpose. Gordon called an old friend who still worked at the county courthouse, asking quietly whether any record remained of a complaint filed 18 years earlier by a boy named Daniel Walcott. There was a record, buried in storage, never formally closed. Simply abandoned, the way inconvenient truths in small towns so often are. Earl drove into town and sat with Sienna at the kitchen table each night, going over what she planned to say, the way a father might help a child rehearse lines for a play that actually mattered. Keep it simple, he told her. Truth doesn't need decoration, only lies need that. Caleb, for his part, surprised everyone by asking if he could speak as well. I've spent 3 years being talked about instead of talked to, he said quietly, sitting in Gordon's office the night before the hearing. Maybe it's time I actually used my own voice instead of borrowing someone else's. Gordon studied him for a long moment, something like pride settling into the lines of his face. Your father would be proud of you for saying that, he said. More proud than you probably know. The night before the hearing, Sienna sat alone in her room, the canvas bag resting on the chair beside her bed, the black belt no longer hidden inside it but tied instead around her waist beneath her clothes. The way it had been every day for the past 3 weeks. She thought about her father at 18, sitting somewhere very much like this the night before he tried to do the right thing and watched the world punish him for it. She thought about how alone he must have felt, and she thought with a kind of fierce, steady gratitude about how different her own version of that night looked. Gordon in her corner, Earl in her corner, Caleb and Devon, unlikely allies bound together by the same family's old cruelty, standing beside her instead of watching from a careful distance. Her father had fought this fight alone. She wasn't going to have to. Outside the dojo windows, evening had fully settled over Millhaven, streetlights flickering on one by one along the quiet road leading back toward campus. Somewhere across town, Marcus Holt was likely sleeping soundly, confident in a lifetime of consequences that had never once managed to catch up with him. He had no idea how quickly that was about to change. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock Thursday morning, in a conference room on the second floor of the administration building. The same building where so much of this town's quiet history had been quietly buried over the years. Sienna spent Wednesday evening at the dojo, not training but simply sitting on the bench, watching Gordon move through his closing routine, sweeping the floor, dimming the lights one set section at a time, locking the cabinet where the old trophies sat gathering dust. "You're stalling," she said. Gordon paused, broom in hand, a tired smile crossing his face. Old habit. Closing this place down slow used to be my favorite part of the day. Gave me time to think, what are you thinking about tonight? He set the broom against the wall and sat down beside her, joints creaking audibly in the quiet room. Your father, he admitted, wondering what he'd think watching all this unfold, wondering if he'd be proud or if he'd be terrified for you. Maybe both, Sienna said. Probably both, Gordon agreed. He was quiet for a moment, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the photograph wall across the room. I need to tell you something, he said finally. About tomorrow, Sienna turned to face him fully. What is it? I'm going to speak, Gordon said, at the hearing. Not just as your instructor. As a witness, I'm going to tell them everything. About your father, about what happened 18 years ago, about my own silence, and what it cost. Sienna felt her chest tighten. Gordon, you don't have to do that. It's not your fault what happened to my dad. Yes, Gordon said firmly, it is. Maybe not entirely, but enough of it. I had information that could have changed the outcome, and I chose comfort over courage. Spent 15 years telling myself that silence wasn't really a choice, that I was just staying out of something that wasn't mine to fix. He shook his head slowly. That was a lie I told myself to sleep easier at night. Why tell the truth now? After all this time, Gordon's eyes met hers, steady and resolved, because watching you walk into this town and refuse to make the same mistake I made, that's the bravest thing I've witnessed in 15 years. Seemed wrong to let you carry that bravery alone while I keep hiding behind mine. Sienna's eyes stung with sudden tears. What if it doesn't change anything? What if they bury this too, the way they buried it before? Then at least, Gordon said, the truth will have been said out loud, in a room full of witnesses, where it can't be quietly erased the way it was the first time. Sometimes that's the only victory available to us, saying the thing. Refusing to let silence win by default, sat together for a long while after that, the dojo quiet around them, streetlight filtering faintly through the front windows. Can I ask you something? Sienna said eventually. Anything. Were you scared back then, when my dad came to you, asking for help? Gordon considered the question with the kind of honesty that only comes after years of sitting with regret. Terrified, he admitted. Not of Marcus's grandfather, exactly. More afraid of what it would cost me. This dojo was everything I had. My whole identity was wrapped up in keeping these doors open. I told myself protecting that mattered more than one boy's reputation, and now? Now, Gordon said, I understand that some things matter more than keeping doors open. I think your father understood that his whole life, even after everything it cost him. I think that's why you understand it too. Sienna left the dojo that night with something heavier and steadier settling into her chest. Not quite peace, something close enough to carry her through what was coming. At home, Earl was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of tea steaming on the small table between the rocking chairs. Couldn't sleep either. Huh, he said, handing her a mug as she sat down beside him. Too much on my mind. Your dad used to say the night before something important always felt longer than it should, Earl said. Like time was giving you one last chance to back out before it got too late. Did he ever back out? Of anything? Earl's expression turned thoughtful. Once, the night before he was supposed to testify about what happened to Robert Foster, he almost didn't show up. Sat right here on this porch, just like you're doing now, trying to talk himself into walking away. What changed his mind? I asked him a question, Earl said. Same one I'm going to ask you now. If you'll let me, go ahead. Earl turned to face her fully, his weathered eyes steady in the porch light. If you walk away tomorrow, he said, and Marcus Holt gets to keep doing what he's been doing unchecked, for as long as his family's money lasts, can you live with that? Not survive it. Live with it. Every single day, knowing you had the chance to stop it and chose comfort instead, Sienna thought of Caleb's flinch before every punch, of Devon's trembling hands, of her father's photograph 18 years old, grinning before the world taught him that doing the right thing sometimes cost more than people warned you about. No, she said quietly, can't live with that. Earl nodded, satisfied. Then you already know what you're walking into that room to do tomorrow. They sat together uncomfortable. Silence after that, the wind chimes swaying gently above them, the whole quiet town of Millhaven holding its breath for what morning would bring. Later that night, Sienna's phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Can't sleep. You up? She typed back immediately. Same. Want to talk? A moment later, her phone rang. I keep running through everything I might say tomorrow, Caleb admitted, voice tight with nerves. And every version sounds either too angry or too scared. I don't know how to find the middle. Maybe there isn't a middle, Sienna said. Maybe you just say what's true and let it sound however it sounds. That's easy for you to say. You've got 10 years of training telling you exactly how to stand in a room like that. I've got training telling me how to stand, Sienna said. Not how to talk. That part I'm figuring out same as you. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Always, are you scared? Sienna considered the question carefully before answering. Yes, she admitted. Not of Marcus, not really. Scared of what happens if we say everything true tomorrow. And it still doesn't change anything. I'm scared this town finds a way to bury it again, the way it buried it for my dad, and if that happens, then we say it again, Sienna said. And again, until somebody finally has to listen. My dad gave up after one try, because he had nobody standing beside him telling him to keep going. We're not going to make that mistake. Caleb exhaled slowly. I'm glad you moved here, Sienna. I know that's a weird thing to say given everything that's happened. But I am, me too, Sienna said, and meant it completely. They talked for another 20 minutes, mostly about nothing important. Caleb's nervousness about an upcoming exam, Sienna's grandfather's terrible cooking, small ordinary things that had nothing to do with hearings or family secrets, or 15 years of silence finally coming undone. It helped, somehow, more than either of them expected. Around midnight, Sienna's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a number she didn't recognize. This is Devon. Got your number from Caleb. Hope that's okay, can't sleep either. Wanted to say thank you. Before tomorrow happens and everything changes. Whatever happens in that room, you gave me the courage to finally stop being quiet. That matters more than you probably know. Sienna stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, thank you for being brave enough to use it. None of this works without you. See you tomorrow, Devon wrote back. But I think that's okay. It is, Sienna replied. Scared and doing it anyway is basically the whole definition of courage. She set her phone down finally, the dojo's lights long since gone dark across town, Earl's gentle snoring audible through the thin bedroom wall, the whole house settling into the particular quiet that comes before something important. Sienna lay awake a while longer, staring at the ceiling fan ticking slowly overhead, the black belt resting on the chair beside her bed where she'd laid it out carefully, ready for morning. Tomorrow, she understood, wouldn't just be about Marcus Holt, or Dean Whitmore, or even her father's long-buried story. It would be about whether a town like Millhaven could finally choose to be braver than its own comfortable silence. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, sleep came easily. The conference room was smaller than Sienna expected, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a long table at the front where Dean Whitmore sat flanked by two other administrators Sienna didn't recognize. Across the room, on the opposite side, sat the Holt family. Marcus, dressed sharply, expression carefully neutral. His mother, sharp-featured and tense. And beside them, a man Sienna hadn't met before but recognized instantly from the resemblance. Broad-shouldered, silver-templed, radiating the particular confidence of someone who had never once doubted the world would bend in his favor. Richard Holt, Marcus's father. The county's most prominent real estate developer and, Sienna now understood. The architect of 3 generations of carefully buried silence, Dev sat several rows back, separate from her uncle's family, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed determinedly forward. Sienna beside Gordon and Earl, with Caleb just behind them, his father, a quiet, weathered man Sienna had only met that morning, sitting protectively at his side. Dean Whitmore cleared his throat, shuffling papers with visibly nervous hands. "We're here this morning," he began, "to address an incident that occurred on campus involving Miss Sienna Walcott and Mr. Marcus Holt, as well as broader concerns raised regarding patterns of conduct." Richard Holt spoke before anyone else could. "With respect, Dean Whitmore, my understanding was this hearing concerned a single incident. A physical altercation initiated by Miss Walcott against my son." "Initiated," Sienna repeated, unable to stop herself. "Your son shoved me in front of a crowd of witnesses after," Richard Holt said smoothly, "you provoked him with baseless accusations about our family." "They weren't baseless," Gordon said, voice cutting clearly across the room. "And I think it's time this room finally heard the whole truth, instead of just the parts your family's been comfortable sharing for the past 3 generations. Richard Holt's composure flickered, just slightly. "Excuse me?" Gordon stood slowly, joints protesting, but his voice remained steady and clear. "My name is Gordon Pruitt," he said. "I've run a dojo on the edge of this town for almost 50 years. 18 years ago, a young man named Daniel Walcott came to me asking for help. He'd witnessed your father, Richard, allow his son, your brother, repeatedly assault another student, a boy named Robert Foster. The room went very still. Daniel did everything right," Gordon continued, "documented it, reported it through proper channels, tried, in every responsible way available to an 18-year-old, to protect a kid who couldn't protect himself." Richard Holt's jaw tightened. "This is ancient history, completely irrelevant to." "It's entirely relevant," Gordon said firmly, "because your family's response back then was to threaten that boy's future until he and his family left this town entirely. And now, 18 years later, your son is doing the exact same thing to Robert Foster's son, Caleb, while this institution looks the other way exactly like it did back then." Caleb's father, sitting quietly until now, spoke up, voice rough with old emotion. "My son still has nightmares about what your family did to him, Mr. Holt. Wakes up some nights thinking he's back in that hallway." The room shifted, the weight of decades finally pressing down into the present moment. Dean Whitmore, visibly shaken, looked between the families with the desperate expression of a man realizing the situation had grown far larger than he'd prepared for. "Mr. Pruitt," he said carefully, "these are serious allegations spanning multiple generations. Do you have any evidence to support?" "I have a complaint filed with the county courthouse 18 years ago," Gordon said, retrieving a folder from his bag and setting it firmly on the table. "Never formally closed, simply abandoned. I have copies of letters Daniel wrote me afterward, describing exactly what happened to his reputation, his future, his sense of safety in this town. Once your family decided his honesty was inconvenient," Richard Holt's face had gone pale, the careful composure finally cracking, and, Gordon continued, voice softening slightly, heavier now with personal weight, "I have my own confession to add to this record. I believed Daniel completely 18 years ago, and I said nothing publicly, because protecting my business mattered more to me at the time than protecting the truth. I've lived with that regret for 15 years, and I won't compound it by staying silent again today." The room fell into a silence so complete Sienna could hear her own heartbeat. Dean Whitmore, visibly overwhelmed, turned to Sienna. "Miss Walcott, given what's just been shared, perhaps you'd like to address the incident from your own perspective." Sienna stood, legs steadier than she expected, the black belt tied invisibly beneath her clothes, a quiet weight reminding her exactly why she'd come this far. "Marcus has been escalating since the first week of the semester," she said clearly. "Targeting Caleb specifically, the same way his family targeted Caleb's father years before either of us was born. The incident in the courtyard wasn't isolated. It was the latest in a pattern. That speculation," Richard Holt cut in sharply. "It's documented," Sienna corrected, nodding toward Devon. Devon stood slowly, hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady when she finally spoke. "I have video," she said, "from the courtyard incident. I told Marcus I deleted it. I lied because I was afraid of what my family would do if I didn't." A sharp intake of breath came from Marcus's mother. Richard Holt's expression turned thunderous. "Devon," he said, voice low in warning, "think very carefully about what you're doing right now." "I have," Devon said, voice trembling but resolute. "I've thought about it for 3 years, actually. Every time Marcus hurt someone and I stayed quiet. Every time I told myself protecting the family name mattered more than protecting people who deserved protecting. She looked directly at her uncle. I'm done thinking about it. I'm finally doing something instead. She handed Dean Whitmore a small flash drive, hands still shaking but determined. This contains the courtyard video, she said, along with nearly a year of messages where Marcus describes, in his own words, things he's done to other students. Caleb isn't the only one. There are at least 4 others. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. Sienna stepped forward, retrieving her own phone. I have additional footage as well. From the first week of the semester, when Marcus first began targeting Caleb at the student fair. She played the clip, the dean's office speakers crackling slightly as Marcus's voice, unmistakable and cruel, filled the room, mocking Caleb in front of his friends, casual contempt unmistakable even months later. Marcus's face had gone bright red, fury and humiliation warring visibly across his features. This proves nothing, he finally snapped. It's just talking. Everyone talks like that, no, Caleb said quietly, finally speaking for the first time since the hearing began. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Everyone doesn't talk like that, Marcus. You talk like that because you've spent your whole life learning that nothing you say or do will ever actually cost you anything. Marcus's jaw worked silently, anger and something that looked almost like fear flickering behind his eyes. My brother still can't sit in a crowded room without locating every exit first, Caleb continued, voice growing stronger with every word. 3 years later. Because of what you did to him. And you've spent the past month doing the exact same thing to me, probably hoping I'd be too scared to ever say anything. The same way he was too scared. The same way my father was too scared before him. Caleb's father placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, pride and grief mingling visibly on his weathered face. I'm not scared anymore, Caleb said, looking directly at Marcus. I think that's the part you never accounted for. Richard Holt rose abruptly from his chair, face dark with barely controlled fury. This is a coordinated attack on my family, he said. Orchestrated, clearly by people with old grudges and questionable motivations. The only thing that's coordinated, Gordon said calmly, is 15 years of silence finally running out of room to hide in. Dean Whitmore, pale and visibly out of his depth, raised both hands in an attempt to regain control of the room. Given the volume of evidence presented today, he said, voice unsteady, this institution will need to conduct a thorough investigation, both into Mr. Holt's conduct and into how previous incidents involving this family were handled by this administration. That's not good enough, Sienna said firmly. Investigations in this town have a habit of disappearing, the same way evidence disappears, same way people disappear once their families decide the truth is inconvenient. We need something more than another quiet promise. Gordon rose slowly to his feet beside her, his voice steady despite his age, despite the 15 years of carried guilt finally finding its way fully into the open. I'd like to propose something, he said. This institution keeps records of every complaint filed against students. I'd ask that the original complaint Daniel Walcott filed 18 years ago be formally reopened and attached to today's record, so that whatever happens to Marcus going forward, it's tied permanently to the pattern that produced it. Not buried as ancient history, the way it's been buried for nearly 2 decades. Dean Whitmore hesitated, glancing nervously toward Richard Holt. Old habits of deference still visible despite everything that had just been revealed. That request, Dean Whitmore began carefully, would require formally acknowledging institutional failure spanning multiple administrations. Yes, Gordon interrupted, voice firm but not unkind. That's precisely what it would require. And I'd suggest that's exactly the point. Caleb's father spoke up again, voice quiet but carrying real weight. My son has spent 3 years believing this town simply didn't care what happened to him. If you want any of us to believe this hearing actually means something, that record needs to exist somewhere. Nobody can quietly erase it again. Sienna watched Dean Whitmore's face shift through several expressions, fear, calculation, and finally, something that looked almost like genuine resolve, as if the accumulated weight of the room had finally tipped him toward courage he hadn't expected to find in himself. I'll see to it personally, he said finally. Both complaints properly documented, permanently on record. I should have insisted on this transparency from the moment I took this position. I didn't. That's on me, and I won't compound that mistake today. The room exhaled collectively, something shifting in the atmosphere, the careful tension finally beginning to loosen. Sienna glanced toward Marcus, who sat silently throughout this exchange, staring at the table in front of him, the earlier defiance completely drained from his posture. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a young man wielding power he'd never earned, and more like exactly what 18 years old, deeply unprepared for consequences family had spent generations shielding him from. The room held its breath, waiting. It was Marcus's mother who finally broke the silence, voice trembling but clear. "Richard," she said quietly, turning to her husband, "is this true? What they're saying about your brother? About what happened 18 years ago?" Richard Holt's composure finally, completely cracked. "It doesn't matter what happened 18 years ago," he said, voice rising. "What matters is protecting this family's name, protecting everything 3 generations have built in this town." "It matters to me," she said, something steely entering her voice for the first time. "Our son just sat there and let a room full of people describe exactly what he's done. And your only concern is the family name?" Marcus, watching his parents argue in front of the entire room, seemed to shrink for the first time since Sienna had met him, the carefully constructed confidence finally collapsing under the weight of consequences he'd never once expected to face. "Dad," he said quietly, "is it true? What happened with Uncle?" "That's not relevant right now," Richard Holt snapped. "It's entirely relevant," Marcus's mother said firmly. "Our son needs to understand exactly where this behavior comes from, instead of inheriting it like some kind of family tradition nobody's ever brave enough to question." She turned to Dean Whitmore, voice steady despite the visible emotion underneath. "I want a full investigation, not a quiet one, a real one, and I want my son to face whatever consequences that investigation determines are appropriate." "Margaret?" Richard started. "No," she said firmly. "I've spent 15 years married into this family, watching you protect Marcus from every consequence he's ever deserved, telling myself it was just how things worked here. I'm done telling myself that." Richard Holt stood frozen, the room's attention fully on him now, decades of careful family control unraveling in real time, slowly, visibly struggling. He turned to face Gordon. "You said Daniel Walcott documented everything," he said quietly, voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. 18 years ago, he did," Gordon confirmed. "And my father buried it. He did that too." Richard Holt was quiet for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the beginning of it, the first crack in decades of inherited certainty. "I was 12 when that happened," said quietly. "I remember my father telling me the Walcott boy was troublemaking. Jealous of our family's standing, I believed him completely. Spent 18 years believing him completely, and now?" Sienna asked Richard Holt looked at his son, then at Devon, then finally at Sienna, something heavy and complicated crossing his weathered features. "Now," he said slowly, "I think I owe your father an apology I can never actually deliver. And I think the very least I can do is make sure my son faces what your father never got the chance to see anyone face." He turned to Dean Whitmore. "Conduct your investigation, fully. I won't interfere, and I won't have my lawyers interfere either. Whatever consequences are appropriate, my son will accept them." Marcus stared at his father, stunned. "Dad." "I failed you," Richard Holt said quietly, turning to face his son directly. "I taught you that money protects you from consequences. That's not strength, Marcus. I understand that now, watching this room today. It's just cowardice with better furniture." The room sat in stunned silence, the unexpected reversal settling slowly over everyone present. Dean Whitmore, recovering some measure of composure, cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented and Mr. Holt's statement, he said, "This institution will proceed with a full disciplinary investigation into Marcus Holt's conduct, as well as a separate review of how this administration has handled similar incidents historically." He paused, looking directly at Sienna. "Miss Walcott, I want to formally state that no disciplinary action will be taken against you. Your conduct in the courtyard incident was, by every account presented today, an act of self-defense." Sienna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Beside her, Earl reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently, pride radiating off him in waves he didn't bother to hide. Gordon, still standing, turned to Richard Holt one final time. "Your father once told me," he said quietly, "that men like us don't owe explanations to people who don't sign our paychecks. I believed something close to that myself for far too long. I'm glad to see you've found your way past it faster than I managed to." Richard Holt nodded slowly, something humbled and unfamiliar in his expression. "Your dojo," he said. "I'd like to contribute, not as an apology that fixes anything. Just as a start, I'll consider it," Gordon said evenly. "Once you've spent some time actually listening to what people like Caleb's father have lived through. Money's never been the thing this town needed from your family, Richard. Honesty was always the harder gift, and the one that actually would have mattered. Richard Holt accepted that without argument, something in his posture suggesting he understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly how much his family's comfort had cost the people around them. The hearing concluded shortly after, the room slowly emptying, the weight of 15 years of silence finally visibly lifted from the space. Marcus lingered near the door as everyone filed out, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Caleb," he said quietly. Caleb turned, wary but listening. "I'm not going to pretend I understand everything I just heard today," Marcus said, voice unsteady. "But I'm sorry for what I did to your brother, for what I've been doing to you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it." Caleb studied him for a long moment, old wariness warring with something more complicated. "I don't forgive you," he said honestly. "Not yet, maybe not for a long time. But I appreciate you saying it out loud, instead of letting your family bury it the way they buried everything else." Marcus nodded, something humbled in his posture that hadn't been there an hour before, and walked away without another word. 3 weeks later, the dojo's parking lot was full for the first time in years. Those 3 weeks had moved quickly, the way time tends to move once the hardest part is finally behind you. Word had spread through Millhaven the way news travels in small towns. Slowly at first, then all at once, until it seemed like everyone within 50 miles had heard some version of what happened in that conference room. The local paper ran a story the following week, careful and measured, focusing less on scandal and more on what the piece called a town finally reckoning with patterns it had long chosen not to see. Sienna read it twice, surprised by how gently it handled her father's story, how it framed Gordon's confession not as guilt but as courage arriving 15 years later than it should have. The investigation concluded swiftly once it actually began. Marcus was formally suspended for a full semester, required to complete extensive community service, and the college finally implemented a formal anti-bullying policy with actual enforcement mechanisms, something that had somehow never existed in any meaningful way before. Dean Whitmore resigned 2 weeks after the hearing, citing personal reasons that fooled exactly no one in town. A new dean, an associate professor named Ruth Calloway Pierce, who had taught at Millhaven for over a decade, and had quietly supported students like Caleb for years, without the authority to do much about it, was appointed in his place. Her first official act was establishing a formal reporting system, one that didn't route directly through administrators easily influenced by donor families. Sienna heard secondhand that Caleb's brother had reached out to the new dean's office himself, finally willing, after 3 years of silence, to add his own account to the record. It wasn't required. Nobody asked him to. He simply decided on his own that the truth deserved more witnesses than it had been given the first time around. Caleb told her about it quietly one evening at the dojo, voice thick with something between pride and old grief. "He cried on the phone," Caleb admitted. "First time I've heard him cry since it happened. Said it felt like something finally came loose after 3 years of carrying it alone." "That's what truth does," Sienna said. "Loosens things that silence keeps clenched." But the dojo's full parking lot wasn't about any of that. It was about something else entirely. Word had spread that Pruitt's small, struggling dojo was on the verge of losing its lease. The bank's red-lettered notices finally catching up with years of declining enrollment. Caleb's father, deeply moved by what Gordon had risked to defend his son, had organized something simple but powerful, a community fundraiser, spreading word through every connection the Foster family had built over a lifetime in Millhaven. The response had surprised everyone, Gordon most of all. Former students Sienna had never heard of drove in from neighboring towns, some of them middle-aged now, bringing their own children to see the place where they'd first learned discipline and patience decades earlier. Local businesses donated equipment, mats, fresh paint for walls that hadn't been touched in years. The hardware store on Main Street donated lumber for a new sign, hand-built by a retired carpenter who'd trained under Gordon as a teenager in the 80s. By the day of the event, the dojo's gravel lot overflowed with cars, the building itself packed with townspeople who'd never set foot inside before, all gathered to ensure it wouldn't close its doors after 50 years of quiet service. Sienna stood near the front of the room, watching Gordon move through the crowd, visibly overwhelmed by the turnout, shaking hands, accepting donations, his eyes suspiciously bright more than once throughout the afternoon. "Never expected this," he admitted to Sienna, finding a quiet moment beside her near the photograph wall. 50 years running this place, And it takes your father's story finally coming to light to remind this town why it mattered in the first place. It always mattered, Sienna said. People just needed a reason to remember. Earl approached, 2 cups of lemonade in hand, offering one to Sienna with a tired, contented smile. Your father would have loved this, he said, looking around at the packed room. Not the speeches, not the attentions. Just this. He gestured at the crowd, the warmth, the sense of a town finally choosing to show up for something that mattered. This is what he always wanted Millhaven to be. You really think so? I know so, Earl said. He used to talk about it sometimes, even after everything that happened. Said he hoped someday this town would learn to be braver than its own comfort. Took 18 years and his own daughter to make it happen. But here we are, Sienna's throat tightened. I wish he could see this. Maybe he can, Earl said simply. I don't know how these things work exactly. But I like to think somewhere, somehow, he's watching his girl finish what he started, and feeling prouder than he ever let himself feel about anything while he was here. Devon approached quietly, having spent the past 3 weeks navigating a complicated reconciliation with her family, the early stages of something neither fully broken nor fully healed. My uncle's actually been different, she told Sienna, quieter. Think watching that room finally hold him accountable changed something in him he didn't expect to change. And Marcus? Devon's expression grew thoughtful. Different too. Started seeing a counselor apparently, my aunt insisted. I don't know if it'll stick. Something. It's a start, Sienna agreed. I moved out of the family house, actually, Devon added. Got a small apartment near campus. First time in my life I've lived somewhere that isn't shaped entirely around protecting the family name. It's terrifying, but it's also the first time I've felt like I actually belong to myself. That sounds like exactly the kind of terrifying worth having, Sienna said. Devon smiled, small but genuine. I'm thinking about starting here, actually. Training. Gordon offered me a beginner spot, said something about how every family needs at least one person brave enough to break old patterns. He'd be a good teacher for that, Sienna said. Caleb appeared then, dressed in a crisp white gi, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. It's time, he said. Gordon wants everyone gathered for the ceremony. The crowd quieted as Gordon stepped to the front of the training floor, the late afternoon sun streaming gold through the dojo's front windows. 50 years ago, he began, voice carrying easily across the packed room. I opened this dojo with a simple belief that discipline, patience, and honor could be taught, the same way punches and kicks could be taught. That a person could learn to be strong without ever needing to be cruel. He glanced towards Sienna, something warm and grateful in his expression. Somewhere along the way, I let fear convince me that protecting this building mattered more than protecting that belief. I'm grateful, more than I can properly express, that someone finally reminded me of what actually matters. He turned, gesturing for Caleb to step forward. Caleb Foster, Gordon said, has trained here for nearly 2 months, showing more courage in that time than most people manage in a lifetime. Today, I have the honor of presenting him with his first belt. Sienna watched, throat tight with emotion, as Gordon tied the white belt around Caleb's waist, not the symbol of mastery but the symbol of beginning, of choosing to stand up and take up space in the world, despite every reason fear had given him not to. Caleb's father wept openly in the front row, pride and old grief mingling freely on his weathered face. This belt, Gordon said, addressing the room now, represents something this whole town needed reminding of, that silence protects the wrong people, that courage doesn't mean never being afraid. It means choosing to act anyway, especially when staying quiet would be so much easier. He turned, finding Sienna in the crowd, Sienna Walcott. He said, voice thick with emotion he no longer bothered hiding, walked into my dojo 2 months ago, carrying her father's black belt and her father's unfinished story. She leaves today having finished what he started, with more courage and patience than I've witnessed in 50 years of teaching. The crowd's applause swelled warm and genuine around her. I'd like to offer her something, Gordon continued, if she'll accept it. A position here, as assistant instructor. This dojo needs someone willing to teach the next generation what her father taught me, all those years ago, that real strength chooses honor over comfort, every single time it matters. Sienna stepped forward, eyes bright with tears she didn't try to hide, and accepted Gordon's offered hand. I'd be honored, she said. The room erupted into applause, warm and sustained, the kind that comes not from politeness, but from genuine recognition of something earned. Earl stood near the back, clapping harder than anyone, his weathered face open with a pride he'd clearly been saving up for exactly this moment. Devon stepped up beside Caleb, admiring his new white belt with a soft, encouraging smile. "Looks good on you," she said. "Feels strange," Caleb admitted, glancing down at it. "Like wearing something I haven't earned yet. That's the point of a beginning," Sienna said, joining them. "It's supposed to feel like that. The earning happens after." Caleb's father approached, resting a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Your brother's coming up next weekend," he said quietly. "Wants to see the dojo himself. Maybe even try a class if he feels ready." Caleb's eyes widened. "Really? Really," his father said. Said something about wanting to understand what finally gave you the courage he never quite found for himself. "Figured maybe it starts here." Caleb looked toward Sienna, something hopeful and a little overwhelmed crossing his face. "Think Gordon would let him train, even just to watch it first?" "I think Gordon would build him his own mat if that's what it took," Sienna said, smiling. As the celebration wound down and the crowd slowly began filtering out into the cooling evening air, Gordon caught Sienna's attention near the door, nodding toward the back office. "Got something for you," he said. "Should have given it to you weeks ago, honestly." Kept waiting for the right moment, he returned a few minutes later carrying a small, wooden box, worn smooth with age, and set it carefully into her hands. "Your father's old training journal," he said. "Found it going through some boxes after he left town. Never had the heart to mail it to him. Always told myself I'd give it back in person someday." Sienna opened the box carefully, finding inside a thin, leather-bound notebook, her father's handwriting filling page after page, training notes, reflections, small sketches of stances, and toward the back, a single entry dated just weeks before he left Millhaven for good. She read it silently, throat tightening with every line. "Today, Gordon told me real strength isn't about winning. It's about staying yourself, even when the world's trying to convince you that staying yourself costs too much. I don't know what's going to happen with all this, but I know I'd rather lose everything and still recognize my own reflection than win by becoming someone I wouldn't respect." Sienna closed the journal gently, holding it against her chest the way she'd once held the canvas bag containing his black belt. "Thank you," she whispered to Gordon. "Thank your father," Gordon said. "Everything good that happened in this room today started with words he wrote in that little book. 20 years before either of us understood how much they'd eventually matter." That evening, after the crowd had finally dispersed and the dojo settled back into its familiar quiet, Sienna stood alone before the photograph wall, studying the picture of her father at 18, frozen mid-motion, grinning with the particular joy of someone who hadn't yet learned what the world might cost him for doing the right thing. Beside that photograph, Gordon had hung a new frame. Inside it sat the letter her father had written him years ago, the one revealing he'd named his daughter Sienna, the one describing how she trained like him, quiet, careful, dangerous only when it mattered. Underneath, Gordon had added a simple plaque, "Walcott Youth Dojo, where honor is taught, not feared." Sienna traced her fingers over her father's name, feeling for the first time since his death that the grief she carried had finally found somewhere useful to settle, not gone. She understood now that grief like this never fully disappeared, but transformed, somehow, into something steadier, something that looked less like loss and more like inheritance. As Gordon found her there, locking up for the evening, his own eyes glistening faintly in the dim light. "Your father once asked me," he said quietly, "whether doing the right thing was always worth what it cost. I never had a good answer for him back then. Do you have one now?" Gordon considered the question for a long moment, looking around at the dojo, full, finally, of warmth and purpose and the particular kind of hope that only comes after years of patient waiting. "I think," he said slowly, "the cost was never really the point. I think the point was always whether you could live with yourself if you chose silence instead." Father couldn't. Neither, it turns out, could you. Outside, evening had settled fully over Millhaven, streetlights flickering on one by one along the quiet road leading back toward campus, the same road Sienna had walked countless times these past 2 months, carrying grief she hadn't known how to name and a black belt she hadn't known how to wear. She walked home slowly that night, the cool autumn air settling comfortably around her, Caleb and Devon's laughter still echoing faintly in her memory from the celebration, Earl's proud smile still warm in her chest, Gordon's gratitude still settling steady into the space where her grief used to live alone somewhere ahead, beyond the streetlights, beyond this single small town finally choosing courage over comfortable silence. Sienna understood that her father's story hadn't ended in that quiet courtroom 18 years ago, the way the world had once tried to convince him it had. It had simply been waiting, quiet, for someone brave enough to finally finish it. She reached her grandfather's porch as the last light faded from the sky. Earl waiting exactly where he always waited, 2 mugs of tea steaming gently on the small table between the rocking chairs. "Good day?" he asked. The same question he'd asked her first evening in Millhaven, 2 months and an entire lifetime ago. Sienna sat down beside him, accepting the offered mug, looking out at the quiet street, the wind chimes swaying softly above them in the cooling evening air. "The best one I've had in a long time," she said, and for the first time since her father's funeral, she found she meant it completely.